Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Gringo Show. Thanks for joining us as we esperando con alfileres y agujas. That's right, waiting on pins and needles for the final outcome of the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Will it be Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or will they just give the presidency to Kanye West, where the Kardashian family moves into the White House and creates a new reality TV show where Kim is Secretary of Fashion, Khloe Secretary of Instagram, and whomever is whomever, because I don't know anything about them. But I understand if you are not from the US, or even if you are from the US, because, and like so many people don't really care too much about politics or even geography. After I was chatting with an American in a bar in Cancun, she asked me where I lived. I told her Mexico City, and she said, well, why don't you just go home tonight? And I was like, why are you staying in a hotel? And I was thinking that like Cancun is either in or next to Mexico City. I didn't even dare to correct Melissa from Wichita, Kansas. I just let her be. But the election is still incredibly close. Joe Biden is only a few electoral votes away from becoming the 46th president of the United States. Let's take a look at the current map. And please remember that this is changing every minute and every hour. And this map has Arizona going for Biden, but there are a number of news organizations that have not called Arizona for Biden yet. But we have Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. There are only a few states to be called. And I will say, I'm not going to gloat. I'm not going to gloat. Okay, I'm going to gloat. The Gringo Show map that I predicted last week is almost the same. I missed Iowa. There you go. I missed Iowa. Nobody really cares about Iowa unless you've invested in corn. And now possibly Georgia, but we'll see. Anyway, let me run down for you what is happening or what has happened so you know the details and just repeat it at your next dinner or work Zoom call to impress your colleagues and friends. So this election has been a peculiar one due to our great friend COVID, because he's the guy who decides to walk into a perfectly calm party, wasted, and ruins the night for everybody. COVID, don't pour that rum and coke on the floor. Put yourself together. Stop being the center of attention, COVID. So the insanity that is the U.S. electoral system is that every state has their own rules. Yes, 50 different policies, many different types of voting machines and counting methods. It's fucking nuts. Most states responded to the pandemic by allowing people to vote without going to the polls, either via a drop box or submitting their ballot in the mail, and millions of people did it. But it gets more complicated. Each state has their own rules about when these ballots would be opened. Some were tallied days before the election, and some, like our good friends in the great state of Pennsylvania, known for cracked bells, cheesesteaks, and of course the Steelers, which have the people in Mexico are fans of, were prohibited from starting the count of these ballots until election day. Upwards of 3 million mail-in ballots were cast in that state, which is a lot. Each ballot has to be opened, counted, and verified, and the states are not used to this many. It gets better. Each state has its own rules for how long ballots can be received by their elections department after the election. For example, some states, if the ballot was not in the hands of the elections department by election day, then the vote would not be accepted. But in places like Pennsylvania, the ballot must be postmarked by election day, but can be received up to 3 days after. So technically, if the ballots still arrive today, they could be accepted for counting. In normal election years, the amount of absentee or mail-in ballots were pretty insignificant. Voters would line up on an election day, touch a screen or scan a ballot, and when the polls close, the election officials simply flip a switch and find out how many votes were counted, report them, and then news agencies like the Associated Press, NBC, or the Gringo Show, wink, wink, just kidding, have people they hired to look at the data. Look at the surveys they do outside the polls, and that's called exit polling, and then make a projection of which candidate will win that particular state. Then, if they project that the candidate gets enough votes from the Electoral College, they will project the winner of the election. As of 9 p.m. Thursday night, this has not happened yet. In many past elections, Americans knew who their president would be before going to bed. The news organizations are now extremely careful about how and when they project the winner because they've screwed it up in the past. Most famously in 2000, when they called Al Gore the winner of Florida, then Bush, then they were like, we have no idea. And then that dragged on through the courts into December until the Supreme Court stopped additional counting and gave the presidency to George W. Bush. And we know how that one turned out. So this is what is happening. But let's go back a bit because it seems that people have anticipated this happening. In the last few months, President Trump, and yes, he's still president until at least January 20th, tried to delegitimize these mail-in ballots, saying they were fraudulent, made up, that the ballots would be lost, even before a single vote was cast. And as president, he could have submitted a bill to Congress to help fix it, but he didn't, seeming to make this a political strategy. He urged his voters to vote on election day, while Democratic voters, more worried about being infected, voted in huge numbers via mail or drop box. So, of course, on election night, when the votes started to come in, Donald Trump took a huge lead because the election department started reporting votes that were counted in person on the machines on election day. Democrats were freaking out with haunting reminders of 2016. Well, so why doesn't Trump have the presidency right now? About what I was explaining before. So let me share with you. Votes for Biden were sitting inside these mail-in ballots that hadn't been fully counted in some states on election night. So for the last few days, these votes have been counted by hand, one by one, and the process is a slow one. But slowly, Biden's votes have been trickling in, and Trump's lead has been getting smaller and smaller, which many think will eventually evaporate and give Biden the presidency, with the exception of Arizona, where Trump's slowly gaining ground. So the entire world is waiting for basically 4 states, Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, to finish their counting so we can know who will be the next president. Of course, Trump is not going to admit defeat without a fight. He's been on Twitter constantly calling fraud. He's now starting to make lawsuits in the courts, even though there is almost no evidence at all of fraud happening anywhere in the country. Also, at 2:30 in the morning on Wednesday morning of election night, he made a speech at the White House in front of his supporters where he declared victory with absolutely no idea that he was going to win, basically undermining the democratic institutions in the process. He has asked the courts to order the election officials to stop counting the votes, but the counting is still taking place. At any moment, the news organizations can have enough data to say who has won. And so we wait.